Charlotte Sinclair sat in her private office on the top floor of Sinclair Medical Enterprises, surrounded by the gleam of mahogany and polished steel. At 62, she was known for her sharp business acumen and philanthropy, yet beneath her composed exterior, loneliness gnawed at her. The board meeting had ended successfully, but as the applause faded, so did the brief warmth of validation. Charlotte's life was a series of accomplishments, yet it felt like an endless treadmill. That evening, her assistant reminded her of the upcoming visit to St. Mary's Home for Children, a rundown orphanage on the city's east side. The facility was set to receive a generous donation from her foundation, earmarked for a new pediatric wing. Public appearances were routine, but this time, Charlotte felt an inexplicable twinge of anticipation. The next day, Charlotte arrived at the orphanage to the sound of children's laughter and the soft hum of volunteers. The director introduced her to the staff, but Charlotte's attention shifted when a young boy, about 10 years old, darted past, clutching a tattered notebook. His eyes were a striking gray-blue, and his smile, though shy, was radiant. "Liam," called the director, chuckling, always with his stories and drawings. Charlotte's gaze lingered on Liam as he sat by a window, absorbed in his sketches. Something about him felt unsettlingly familiar. A brief conversation revealed that he lived with his grandmother, Dolores, a frail woman whose health was declining rapidly. Charlotte felt a pang of sympathy. No, something deeper. She resolved to learn more about the boy who had unexpectedly touched her heart. Charlotte's visits to St. Mary's became more frequent, initially masked as check-ins on the progress of her donation. In reality, she was drawn back by Liam's presence, his quiet resilience, and the stories he sketched in his battered notebook. Each visit revealed new layers to his world, drawings of fantastical creatures and cityscapes filled with light and shadow, worlds far removed from the drabness of his reality. One afternoon, Charlotte found herself in a quiet corner of the orphanage's common room, watching Liam draw. His thin frame hunched over the page, eyebrows furrowed in concentration. She cleared her throat, and Liam looked up, startled. "Hi, Miss Sinclair," he said softly, the corners of his mouth lifting in a hesitant smile. "Hello, Liam. May I see what you're working on?" She gestured to the notebook, her voice careful not to betray how much she longed to know him better. Liam hesitated, eyes darting between her and the drawing as if weighing the consequences. Finally, he turned the page toward her. It was an intricate sketch of a towering castle surrounded by fields of wildflowers, each line deliberate, each detail precise. "It's beautiful," Charlotte said, genuinely impressed. "Do you want to be an artist?" He shrugged, the faintest shadow crossing his face. "Maybe. My grandma says I should do whatever makes me happy." He paused, and the wistfulness in his eyes deepened. "But it's hard when she's sick." Charlotte's chest tightened at the mention of Dolores. Over the past few weeks, she'd heard snippets of their life. The woman who raised Liam after his father's death and his mother's sudden disappearance. Dolores had worked tirelessly, but age and illness were now taking their toll. "Is your grandma all right?" Charlotte asked, trying to keep her tone neutral, though her heart pounded with concern. Liam sighed and tucked a pencil behind his ear. "She tries to be. I help her with the medicines and chores. Sometimes she says we just need a little luck." His gaze shifted to the window, far away and hopeful, as if searching for that luck on the other side of the glass. Charlotte felt an unexpected protectiveness bloom in her chest. "Liam, how would you feel if I visited your grandma one day?" "I'd love to meet her." Liam's face lit up, and for a moment, he was just a boy. Not a caretaker, not a child burdened with responsibilities, but simply a child who wanted to share a piece of his life. The next visit took Charlotte to a small, aging apartment on the edge of the city. Peeling paint and cracked steps spoke of years of wear, but inside, the space was warm with the scent of baked bread and chamomile tea. Dolores sat in a worn armchair, a blanket draped over her thin legs. Her eyes, faded but sharp with awareness, followed Charlotte as she entered. "Miss Sinclair," Dolores greeted, her voice raspy but strong. "Liam's told me a lot about you." "I hope all good things," Charlotte replied, smiling as she glanced at Liam, who was busy setting a mismatched tea set on the table. Only good, Dolores said, her expression softening. You've been kind to him, and for that, I'm grateful. They spoke for an hour, exchanging stories over tea, punctuated by Liam's interjections and proud displays of his latest sketches. Dolores shared tales of Liam's father, Thomas, who had been a dreamer much like his son, full of plans and hope until tragedy cut them short. She mentioned Liam's mother, too, Emma, whose sudden departure left an unhealed wound in their family. Charlotte listened, each word a needle sewing new emotions into her heart. The ache she felt was no longer just sympathy but something deeper, almost as if the story of Liam's family mirrored a part of herself she kept locked away for decades. Before leaving, Charlotte reached into her purse and handed Dolores a business card. If you ever need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call me. Dolores accepted it with a tremble in her fingers. You're kind, Miss Sinclair, but kindness like this, it usually has a story behind it. Charlotte's breath caught. Dolores's gaze seemed to pierce right through her, as if she could see the ghosts of Charlotte's past trailing behind her. But the older woman only patted her hand gently before turning her attention to Liam, who was now explaining the details of his latest masterpiece. Driving back through the dusky streets of the city, Charlotte's mind whirled with memories she had long tried to bury. The image of a baby boy with eyes as blue as Liam's haunted her. The choice she'd made all those years ago, driven by circumstance and regret, now weighed heavier than ever. Could it be possible, she wondered, that fate was offering her a second chance to make things right? With each passing block, Charlotte felt her resolve strengthen. She would help Liam and Dolores, not just out of obligation or guilt, but out of a desire she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. The longing to heal, to make amends, and perhaps to be part of something bigger than her legacy of wealth and power. The early morning light filtered through Charlotte's penthouse windows as she sat nursing a cup of coffee. The skyline stretched before her, a concrete reminder of her accomplishments and the life she'd built. But now, those towering buildings seemed hollow compared to the small apartment where Liam and Dolores had welcomed her with more warmth than she'd felt in years. Charlotte rubbed her temples, trying to push away the unsettling thoughts that had taken root since her visits. Memories from decades past, memories she'd wrapped tightly and locked away, were beginning to stir. The face of her first love, Mark, with his deep laugh and dreams that rivaled her ambition, came to her mind. Their brief, fiery romance ended not in bitterness, but in heartbreak, particularly when the consequence of that love, a child, arrived at the wrong moment in their young, unprepared lives. She sighed, feeling the weight of that lost chapter pressing on her heart. The decision to give the baby up was a choice born of desperation and hope that he would have a better life. But now, seeing Liam, so vibrant yet vulnerable, had pulled at threads she thought had frayed long ago. The shrill ring of her office phone cut through the quiet. Charlotte set down her cup and answered, recognizing the voice of her assistant, Nora, on the other end. Miss Sinclair, there's a woman on line 2. She says it's urgent. About the donation to St. Mary's. Charlotte's pulse quickened. Put her through. The line clicked, and the voice of Sister Margaret, the director of the orphanage, came through, tinged with worry. Miss Sinclair, I hope I'm not bothering you, but there's been an incident. It's Liam's grandmother. Dolores was taken to the hospital early this morning. Charlotte's breath caught. Is it serious? Very. The doctors are doing all they can, but she's asking for you. If you can come, I'll be there within the hour, Charlotte promised, the urgency in her voice undeniable. Within minutes, she was en route to St. Luke's General, her heart pounding. The hospital was bustling, but the sterile air and hum of machinery barely registered as Charlotte approached Dolores's room. Liam sat in a hard plastic chair outside, knees drawn to his chest. His face lit up when he saw her, a mix of hope and exhaustion in his young eyes. Miss Sinclair, he exclaimed, scrambling to his feet. Before she could respond, he threw his arms around her waist, clinging to her in a way that made her heart ache. I'm here, Liam, she whispered, her hand brushing through his unruly hair. How's your grandma? He pulled back, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hand. The doctor says she's really sick. She wanted to talk to you. Charlotte took a deep breath and stepped into the dimly lit room. Dolores lay against crisp white sheets, her face pale, framed by thinning gray hair. Yet her eyes, though weary, sparkled when she saw Charlotte. "You came," Dolores said, her voice barely a rasp. "Of course," Charlotte said, taking her frail hand in hers. Dolores's fingers curled weakly around hers. "Liam, he's strong, but he needs someone who sees him, who loves him the way he deserves. I know there's something in you, Miss Sinclair, something familiar." She paused to catch her breath. "You understand what it's like to carry the weight of choices." Charlotte's throat tightened. How did Dolores seem to know so much without ever saying it outright? It was as if the older woman could see past the barriers Charlotte had erected over the years. "Take care of him," Dolores said, her voice cracking. "Please." The words resonated like a vow. Charlotte nodded, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. "I will. I promise." Dolores closed her eyes, the tension in her features easing as if some great burden had been lifted. Moments later, the room fell silent, and Charlotte knew Dolores had slipped into unconsciousness. Charlotte stood by the bedside, unmoving, as the echoes of her own past choices filled the quiet. She remembered the boy she had given up and how his future had been a mystery she forced herself not to think about. The question that now loomed was too large to ignore. Could Liam be connected to that long-buried chapter of her life? Later, as she guided a stunned and silent Liam to the car, Charlotte's mind raced. Dolores's plea reverberated in her chest, stronger than ever. Liam was more than just a boy she felt compelled to help. There was a connection, and she needed to understand it. When they reached her home, Liam wandered to the wide window overlooking the city. His small figure stood silhouetted against the view, looking smaller and more vulnerable than ever. Charlotte knelt beside him, her voice gentle. "Liam, from now on, you're not alone. I'm here, and I'll do whatever I can to take care of you." He looked at her, his eyes glistening. For a moment, he said nothing. But then he reached out and took her hand, gripping it tightly as if it was the one anchor he could trust. In that moment, Charlotte felt a warmth spread through her that was unfamiliar yet deeply comforting. It was as if, in holding Liam's hand, she was reaching across time, holding onto the family she once lost, now rediscovered in the eyes of this brave young boy. The days following Dolores's passing were a blur of legal meetings, funeral arrangements, and quiet moments shared with Liam. Charlotte found herself more committed than ever to this young boy who had unknowingly reignited a part of her that she thought had been extinguished long ago. The funeral was a simple affair, attended by a handful of neighbors, volunteers from the orphanage, and some of Dolores's old friends. Charlotte stood by Liam's side, her hand resting protectively on his shoulder as they both said goodbye. The boy's eyes, usually so full of imagination, were hollow with grief. The sight stirred something fierce within Charlotte, a determination to protect him, no matter what. In the days that followed, Liam moved into one of Charlotte's guest rooms. She made efforts to ease the transition, filling his space with art supplies and books, small gestures that brought flickers of light back into his eyes. Yet, despite her kindness, Liam was withdrawn, adjusting to the unfamiliar quiet of Charlotte's grand home. One evening, after a particularly long day at her office, Charlotte returned to find Liam sitting at the dining table, his sketchbook open and untouched. The room was cast in the soft glow of the chandelier, making the boy's features look even more delicate. "Hey, Liam," she said, setting her briefcase down and approaching him. "How was your day?" He shrugged without looking up, the pencil in his hand turning idly. She pulled out a chair and sat beside him, glancing at the page. To her surprise, it wasn't a drawing but a note, written and rewritten, so many times that the paper was worn thin. "Are you trying to write something?" she asked softly. Liam's small fingers tightened around the pencil. "It's for my mom. I don't know if she'll ever see it, but I thought, maybe if I write to her, she'll come back." Charlotte felt her heart clench. The hope in Liam's voice, tentative and bruised, mirrored the very hope she once had when she searched for news of her own son, hoping for a letter or a name that never came. "Can I see it?" Charlotte asked, holding out her hand. Liam hesitated but passed the paper over. The words were simple yet poignant. "Dear Mom, I miss you. Grandma said you loved me, but I don't remember much. If you can, please come back. I'm with someone who's nice and takes care of me. You'd like her." Charlotte blinked back tears. She reached for Liam's hand and squeezed it gently. "Liam, wherever your mom is, I'm sure she's thinking of you. And you're not alone now. We're going to figure this out together." For the first time in days, Liam looked up at her, a small, hopeful flicker in his eyes. "Do you think we can find her?" The question lingered in the air like an unspoken promise. Charlotte had the resources, the connections, and, above all, the motivation to seek out the truth about Liam's mother. The more she pieced together his past, the more she needed answers, not just for Liam's sake, but for her own. Could it be that her life was intertwined with his in a way she had yet to understand? That night, when Liam was asleep, Charlotte sat in her study, surrounded by papers and old photo albums. She retrieved a small box from the bottom drawer of her desk, something she hadn't opened in decades. Inside was a single photograph of a baby boy with eyes that mirrored Liam's, her son, who would now be a grown man if he were still alive. Charlotte traced the edges of the photo, the faint crinkles worn by time and regret. The name of the adoption agency was imprinted on the back, a long-forgotten institution that had closed down years ago. Still, it was a lead, and with her influence, she could dig deeper. The next morning, Charlotte called in a favor from an old friend in private investigations, a man named Thomas Caldwell. Within hours, he stood in her office, files spread across the mahogany table as they began to unravel the connections between Liam, his father, and the adoption that had changed Charlotte's life forever. "Charlotte," Thomas said, running a finger down one of the documents, "I think I have something." Liam's father, Thomas Jr., had a wife named Emma who disappeared under unusual circumstances. There's no record of her being deceased. It's possible she's still out there, under a different name. Charlotte's breath caught in her chest. Emma. She could be Liam's mother. Thomas nodded. "And if what I'm seeing here is correct, Thomas Jr. might have been adopted through the same agency you used." The room seemed to tilt, the implications dizzying. Liam was not just a boy who needed her. He was her grandson. The pieces clicked together with a terrifying clarity, each revelation pulling her deeper into a story she never expected to live. Charlotte leaned back in her chair, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She stared at Liam's picture on the table, feeling a surge of love and responsibility stronger than anything she'd known. "We need to find Emma," she said, her voice steady. "For Liam, for me, and for the family we both lost." Charlotte's mind buzzed with revelations, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. She hadn't imagined that helping Liam would uncover the very secrets she had buried for so long. Now, the need to find Emma was not just about helping Liam. She needed to know how her son's story had ended and if there was a chance to bring their fractured family back together. Determined, Charlotte took time off from her work, turning her full attention to the search. Thomas Caldwell, her private investigator, had already set a few leads in motion. They met regularly in her office, reviewing documents, scouring adoption records, and examining anything that could shed light on Emma's disappearance. One evening, as the autumn sun dipped below the horizon, Charlotte sat with Thomas in her study, reviewing the latest findings. "Charlotte, I think I've found something substantial," Thomas said, passing her a manila folder. "Emma didn't just disappear. She changed her name." Charlotte's eyes widened as she opened the folder to see a faded photograph of a young woman with long dark hair and piercing blue eyes. Beneath the image was a name she didn't recognize. "Claire Adams." "Claire Adams," Charlotte whispered, tracing the edges of the photo. The face in the picture held a haunting resemblance to Liam, especially in the eyes. "This is her." Thomas nodded. According to the records, Emma legally changed her name to Claire Adams about 5 years after her husband's death. She moved to another state and has been living under the radar ever since. It looks like she had a difficult few years, dealing with the aftermath of her loss. "Why would she leave Liam?" Charlotte asked, a hint of anger and sadness in her voice. "He's her son. He needed her." Thomas looked at her thoughtfully. "From what I gathered, it seems she struggled with guilt and trauma after her husband died. Emma, Claire, may have felt incapable of caring for him and feared she'd bring him more harm than good. Charlotte sat back, absorbing the information, her heart aching for the young woman who must have felt trapped and alone. Emma had faced her own demons and, like Charlotte herself, had made choices that left scars across generations. "What do I do now, Thomas?" Charlotte asked, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "If I reach out to her, what if she's not ready to come back into Liam's life?" Thomas placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You've already given Liam a lifeline. You're his family now, Charlotte. But I think you owe it to both of them to let Claire know her son is still waiting for her." The following day, Charlotte took a deep breath and dialed the number Thomas had found for Claire. Her hands shook as she listened to the ringing, each tone stretching her nerves taut. Finally, a soft voice answered on the other end. "Hello?" Charlotte swallowed, her voice thick with emotion. "Hello, is this Claire Adams?" A pause. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Charlotte Sinclair," she said, fighting to keep her tone steady. "I believe you were once known as Emma and that you had a son named Liam." There was a sharp intake of breath and then silence. Charlotte waited, her heart thudding, until Claire finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. How did you find me?" "I've been caring for Liam," Charlotte explained gently. "He's been staying with me since his grandmother, Dolores, passed. He misses you, Claire. He's been writing letters, hoping you'd come back." Another long silence hung between them, broken only by a soft, choked sound. Claire was crying. "I thought I'd lost him," Claire said, her voice a mixture of relief and pain. "After everything that happened, I thought he'd be better off without me. Liam's a wonderful boy, but he's hurting," Charlotte replied, compassion filling her tone. "He needs you, Claire. You're his mother, and no one else can fill that place in his heart." After a lengthy pause, Claire exhaled shakily. "I'll come. I need to see him, to tell him everything." They arranged a meeting for the following week, giving Claire time to prepare herself for the reunion. As Charlotte hung up, a sense of relief washed over her, mingled with the knowledge that this was only the beginning of a challenging road. The next week was a blur for Charlotte and Liam. She tried to keep him occupied, finding excuses to take him out to museums, bookstores, and parks, gently preparing him for the upcoming reunion without revealing the details. Finally, the day arrived. Charlotte brought Liam to a quiet park near her home, a secluded place with benches tucked under old oak trees and winding paths lined with autumn leaves. She had told Liam that a friend of his grandmother's would be visiting, someone who wanted to see him very much. Liam sat on a bench, looking around nervously. "Do you think she'll like me?" he asked, fiddling with his hands. Charlotte wrapped an arm around him. "Oh, sweetheart, she already loves you. She just had some things to figure out." As they waited, Charlotte spotted a woman approaching in the distance. Her dark hair was swept back, her face drawn but determined, eyes searching until they landed on Liam. She paused, her hand flying to her mouth as tears filled her eyes. "Mom?" Liam whispered, his voice trembling. Claire nodded, barely able to hold back her own emotions. "Yes, Liam, it's me." For a moment, Liam just stared, absorbing her presence, his eyes filling with the weight of years without her. Then, in an instant, he stood up, breaking into a run. Claire opened her arms, and they collided in an embrace that was as much an apology as it was a reunion. Charlotte watched from a distance, her own heart swelling with emotion. She felt like an outsider, and yet deeply connected to this family, tied to them by choices and losses and, now, by redemption. Liam buried his face in Claire's shoulder, his voice muffled. "I missed you. I missed you too, baby," Claire whispered, stroking his hair. "And I'm so sorry. I'm here now. I won't leave you again." The promise echoed in the quiet of the park, filling Charlotte with a profound sense of closure. She knew this was only the beginning of their journey, but for the first time in years, she felt a part of something whole, something healed. After their emotional reunion, Claire moved cautiously back into Liam's life. She stayed in a nearby inn, visiting him each day under Charlotte's gentle encouragement. Each meeting was bittersweet, a chance for mother and son to reconnect, yet also a reminder of the lost years they could never get back. As days passed, Charlotte sensed the tension building within Liam. He was thrilled to have his mother back, but the abandonment still lingered like a shadow over their newfound relationship. Charlotte felt a pang of empathy for Claire as she navigated the tightrope between wanting to make amends and struggling with her own guilt. One evening, Charlotte decided it was time for a family dinner at her home. She hoped a relaxed setting might help Claire and Liam bridge the emotional gap. Claire arrived promptly, bringing a small gift for Liam, a sketchbook with his initials embossed on the cover. Liam's eyes lit up at the sight of the gift, but his excitement was quickly followed by a wary look, as though he were unsure if he could trust this gesture to last. "Thank you," he said, clutching the sketchbook to his chest. "You're welcome, sweetheart," Claire replied, her voice filled with tenderness. "I thought you could use a new one for all your drawings. I've missed so many, but I'd love to see what you've been working on." Dinner unfolded with polite conversation. Claire shared memories from her time with Liam's father, Thomas Jr., and snippets of their life together before he passed. Liam listened intently, his small hand occasionally reaching out for Charlotte's, as if seeking reassurance. When the evening ended, Claire gave Liam a long hug and left, leaving Charlotte alone with Liam. After the door clicked shut, Liam remained silent, gripping the sketchbook as if it were a lifeline. Charlotte placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Sweetheart, are you all right?" she asked. Liam looked up at her, his eyes reflecting a mix of emotions. "I love that Mom's here, but why did she leave me? Why didn't she come back sooner?" Charlotte's heart ached for him. She knew that the truth was a complex web of pain and confusion, one that he was too young to fully grasp. But he deserved honesty. "Liam," she began carefully, "sometimes people go through things that make them feel lost. Your mom loved you, but after your dad passed, she felt scared and hurt. She thought she was doing what was best, even though it hurt both of you." Liam's expression softened slightly, but the sadness remained. "I just don't understand why she didn't come back for me sooner. I was waiting." Charlotte wrapped her arms around him, feeling the weight of his grief and longing. "I know, sweetheart, but she's here now, and she wants to make up for the time she lost. It's okay to feel hurt, but it's also okay to let her try." In the days that followed, Liam allowed himself to get closer to Claire, though there were moments of hesitation, shadows of the trust that needed rebuilding. Charlotte watched them with a mixture of pride and sadness, feeling her own role in their lives shift. She had become more than a caretaker. She was now part of the delicate weave of this family, connected by the past, yet navigating uncharted territory. One afternoon, as Charlotte sat in her office reviewing some old papers, she stumbled upon a file Thomas had left with her, a detailed report on the adoption agency she'd used decades ago. She hadn't read it before, but now she felt compelled to examine its contents. As she flipped through the pages, her eyes landed on an entry that made her heart stop. It was a record of the adoption process, confirming the name of her son's adoptive parents, Thomas and Dolores Baker. Her mind reeled. Liam's father, Thomas Jr., had been her son, her biological son. The boy she'd given up so many years ago had been right there, connected to her in ways she had never imagined. The implications flooded over her in a tidal wave of regret, disbelief, and sorrow. She had been so close to him, to her own family, without ever knowing. Tears pricked her eyes as she realized the gravity of it all. She had found her grandson. Liam was her flesh and blood, and Thomas Jr., her son, had died without ever knowing his biological mother. The pain of this revelation was both a blow and a strange, bittersweet comfort, as if life had orchestrated a cruel twist of fate that also, somehow, brought them together. Sitting in the quiet of her office, Charlotte grieved for the son she never knew and the years she would never recover. But amid the heartbreak, she also felt a deep sense of gratitude. Life had given her a second chance to be there for her grandson, to be the family Liam needed. Determined, she knew she had to tell Claire and Liam the truth. She needed them to know about their shared past, no matter how painful it was. That evening, she gathered them together in her living room. Liam sat on one side, clutching his sketchbook, and Claire, sensing the weight of Charlotte's expression, leaned forward anxiously. "There's something I need to tell both of you," Charlotte began, her voice trembling slightly. "It's something I only recently discovered, and I believe you both deserve to know." She took a deep breath, gathering the strength to speak the words that had been churning in her heart. "Liam," she said, turning to him with a softness in her gaze, "I'm not just someone who came into your life to help. I'm your grandmother, your father, Thomas Jr. He was my son." The room fell into stunned silence, the weight of the revelation settling over them like a heavy fog. Claire's hand flew to her mouth as her eyes filled with shock and realization, while Liam looked at her, wide-eyed, trying to process the meaning of her words. "My son, your father, was given up for adoption when I was young," Charlotte continued, her voice wavering with emotion. "I never knew where he ended up or what kind of life he'd have. And I had no idea that life would somehow bring us back together like this." Liam's face softened, his hand slipping into Charlotte's. "You're my grandma?" he whispered, a hint of awe in his voice. Charlotte nodded, tears finally breaking free. "Yes, sweetheart. And I'm so grateful to have found you, even if it took a lifetime." As the three of them embraced, the air was thick with both sorrow and joy, an emotional balm that began to heal old wounds and weave them closer as a family. A family forged not just by blood but by love, loss, and the courage to forgive. In the days following Charlotte's revelation, emotions ran high, and new layers of love and connection began to form between her, Liam, and Claire. They were no longer just strangers tied by circumstance, but a family discovering each other after a lifetime of separation. Charlotte felt a renewed purpose, a chance to offer the stability and love she'd once longed to give her son but had been unable to. Liam, ever curious, peppered Charlotte with questions about his father, Thomas Jr. He wanted to know every detail, from his favorite childhood games to his dreams and aspirations. Charlotte shared memories she had held close for so long, each one pulling her and Liam closer. Claire, too, found solace in these stories, learning about the side of Thomas she had never known. Yet, amid this fragile peace, a new worry took root. One evening, Charlotte received a call from Liam's school. He hadn't shown up to his afternoon class, and no one had seen him since lunchtime. Panic set in as Charlotte frantically called Claire, her hands trembling as she dialed the number. "Claire, it's Charlotte. I just got a call from the school. Liam didn't show up to his last class. I don't know where he is." A silence stretched on the other end, and then Claire's voice came through, filled with alarm. I don't know either. I thought he was still at school. Do you think he's okay?" Charlotte's mind raced, her heart pounding. Liam was normally a responsible boy, not one to wander off without telling anyone. She tried to push away the worst-case scenarios, but felt the growing dread gnawing at her. "Let's check the places he usually likes to go. I'll go to the park. Maybe he went there to draw. You check around the library and the bookstore." They split up, each driven by worry and the urgent need to find him. Charlotte drove to the park, scanning every bench, path, and hiding spot where he might be. The evening was settling in, casting long shadows, and as the light dimmed, her worry intensified. "Please let him be safe," she whispered to herself, gripping the steering wheel as she continued to search. Meanwhile, Claire searched the library and every aisle of the small bookstore where Liam sometimes spent hours, lost in stories. She asked the librarian, who shook her head, offering only a sympathetic look. After an hour of searching, with still no sign of Liam, Charlotte returned to her home, where she and Claire had agreed to meet. Claire was already there, pacing anxiously in the driveway. "Nothing," Claire said, her voice tight with worry. "I looked everywhere." Charlotte pulled her into a hug, though her own heart was pounding. "We'll find him. Let's call Thomas, see if he can help." Thomas Caldwell, the private investigator who had already done so much for their family, answered her call immediately. Charlotte explained the situation, her voice taut with urgency. "Charlotte, don't worry. I'll make some calls and get a search organized right away," he assured her. "He's a smart kid. We'll find him." Charlotte clutched the phone tightly, nodding even though he couldn't see her. "Thank you, Thomas." As the hours ticked by, their anxiety grew. Just as Charlotte was about to call Thomas again, her phone rang. She answered instantly, her heart pounding. "Charlotte, we've found him. Thomas said, his voice calm but reassuring. He's at Dolores's old apartment. Dolores's apartment? She repeated, her surprise mingling with relief. Why would he go there? I'm not sure, but he seems fine. A little shaken, but unharmed. I'll stay here until you arrive. Without another word, Charlotte and Claire rushed to Dolores's former apartment. They found Thomas waiting outside, and when he saw them, he waved them over with a nod. He's upstairs, in his grandmother's old apartment, Thomas explained. He seemed a bit lost. I think he came here looking for a connection. They climbed the narrow staircase, their footsteps echoing in the empty building. When they reached the door of Dolores's apartment, they found it slightly ajar. Inside, Liam sat on the floor in the middle of the small living room, surrounded by old boxes of Dolores's belongings. Liam, Claire rushed forward, dropping to her knees and pulling him into a tight embrace. We were so worried. Why didn't you tell us where you were going? Liam clung to her, his voice muffled as he spoke into her shoulder. I'm sorry. I missed her, Grandma. I thought, maybe if I came here, I'd feel close to her again. Charlotte felt her heart twist at his words. The old apartment was filled with remnants of Dolores's life. Photos, knickknacks, and a sense of familiarity that she understood Liam had been craving. She knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his back. It's okay, sweetheart, she said softly. We understand. It's hard to lose someone you love. Liam pulled away slightly, looking between Charlotte and Claire with a vulnerability that struck them both. I thought maybe she left something here for me. Something that would tell me more about who I am. About my dad. Claire brushed a hand through his hair, her own eyes filling with tears. Oh, Liam, your dad loved you so much. And I know your grandma did too. You don't have to look for them here. They're always with you. Liam nodded, but Charlotte sensed there was something deeper troubling him. She gently took his hand. Liam, I know it's hard to feel like you belong sometimes, especially with so many changes. But you have a family right here with us. Liam's eyes searched hers, and then Claire's, his voice small as he whispered, I just didn't want to be forgotten. I was scared that, with everything changing, maybe I'd get lost again. Charlotte wrapped her arms around him, pulling him close. Oh, Liam, you are not forgotten, and you will never be lost again. I promise. Claire joined them, her hand resting on Liam's back as they held him together. They were a patchwork family, stitched together by unexpected threads, but in that moment, they were whole, bound by love and an unbreakable promise. As they left the apartment, Charlotte felt a renewed sense of purpose. This family was hers to protect, and she would do everything in her power to make sure Liam never felt alone again. The days after Liam's disappearance were filled with tender moments, as if each family member understood that time was precious and healing was slow but necessary. They spent their afternoons together, sharing meals and stories, and slowly, Claire's tentative steps toward motherhood strengthened. She and Liam began to forge the bond that had been lost during their years apart, but the scars of the past still hovered between them like an unspoken promise that things could yet be repaired. One morning, as autumn leaves blew across Charlotte's garden, she received a call from Thomas Caldwell. He had something urgent to share. Charlotte, I've discovered new information about Liam's father, Thomas began, his voice steady but laced with intensity. There's a connection I hadn't anticipated, a person who knew both Thomas Jr. and Dolores. She might be able to offer insights into their life before the tragedy. Charlotte felt her pulse quicken. Who is she, Thomas? She's an old family friend of Dolores's, a woman named Ethel Monroe. She's been living in a small town a few hours away. I've arranged for us to meet her this afternoon. Charlotte felt a flicker of hope and called Claire, who agreed eagerly to join. Together, they explained to Liam that they would be going on a small trip to meet someone who could tell him more about his father. They drove through the countryside, the roads lined with amber leaves and old stone walls. The journey was quiet, each of them lost in thoughts of what they might uncover. By the time they reached Ethel's small, cozy home, the afternoon sun was casting golden light over the hillside, adding an air of nostalgia to the moment. Ethel was a small, elegant woman with white hair pulled back into a neat bun and eyes that sparkled with warmth and intelligence. She welcomed them in, offering tea and homemade scones before settling into her armchair, her gaze soft as she looked at Liam. "You have his eyes," Ethel murmured, as if seeing Thomas Jr. himself through Liam's face. "I knew your father well, and your grandmother, too. We were very close." Liam leaned forward, his young face bright with curiosity. "What was my dad like?" Ethel's face softened as she recalled her memories. "Oh, Thomas was a dreamer. He had a heart full of ambition and love, and he cared deeply for those around him. He used to talk about building a life where he and his family could be safe and happy. Your grandmother was his rock, always there to support him, even when life grew difficult." She glanced at Claire and Charlotte, her gaze lingering on Charlotte as though she could see something deeper. "Dolores confided in me once, years after adopting Thomas. She told me about his birth mother, about how she felt that Thomas's birth mother was still with them, watching over him in spirit, even if she wasn't there in person." Charlotte felt her breath hitch. She had spent so many years wondering if her son had felt her absence, or if he'd known she loved him despite giving him up. Hearing Ethel's words, she sensed a bittersweet relief. Dolores had respected her memory, keeping her presence alive for Thomas in a way she'd never expected. Ethel continued, looking directly at Charlotte now. "Dolores was a good woman, strong and kind. She knew the importance of family. She always hoped that, one day, Thomas's birth mother would find peace. And I believe, in her own way, she tried to leave something behind for you, for the family." Ethel rose and walked over to a small cabinet in the corner, where she took out a worn leather-bound journal. She handed it to Charlotte with a gentle smile. "This journal belonged to Dolores," she explained. "She wrote in it during her last years, recording memories of Thomas's childhood, hopes for his future, and notes on her love for Liam. I believe she intended for this to be a gift, something for you and Liam to hold on to." Charlotte took the journal in her hands, the weight of it grounding her. She turned the pages slowly, reading Dolores's careful handwriting, filled with stories of Thomas's first words, his favorite books, his dreams to build things, to create a world where he could leave his mark. The words painted a portrait of her son, filling in gaps that she had wondered about for years. Claire leaned over her shoulder, her hand gently resting on Liam's as they read passages together. It was as if, through Dolores's words, they could feel Thomas's presence, bridging the gap of loss and separation. Liam looked up, his voice small but filled with warmth. "Grandma Dolores wanted us to have this, didn't she?" "Yes, sweetheart," Charlotte whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "She wanted us to remember your dad and to know that he loved you deeply. And I believe she wanted us all to be connected, even if she couldn't be here to see it." For hours, they sat with Ethel, sharing memories and stories, laughing and crying as they pieced together the fragments of a life that had been lost but not forgotten. Liam clutched the journal close, absorbing the stories of his father, his grandmother, and the family he'd longed to know. As they prepared to leave, Ethel pulled Charlotte aside, her expression warm and knowing. "Charlotte, life has a way of mending what was broken, even if it takes years. I think Dolores would be at peace knowing you've come back to them." Charlotte nodded, feeling a profound sense of gratitude for this unexpected reunion. Ethel's words resonated in her heart, reminding her that love, even when delayed, had the power to heal and rebuild. On the drive back, Charlotte, Claire, and Liam were quiet, the journal resting on Liam's lap, its pages a tangible link to their shared past. They had traveled miles that day, not just physically but emotionally, crossing into territory that had once seemed unreachable. Back home, as the evening settled in, Liam asked if he could read from Dolores's journal before bed. Charlotte and Claire sat by his side, listening as he recited Dolores's words, stories of his father's courage, his loyalty, and his dreams. That night, as Liam drifted off to sleep, Charlotte and Claire sat together, feeling the weight of the journey they had taken to reunite their family. In that peaceful silence, Charlotte reached over and took Claire's hand, a silent promise passing between them. They had lost so much, but they had found something infinitely more precious, each other. And in that bond, they had reclaimed a family, woven together by love, memories, and the hope for a future they would build hand in hand. As December approached, The spirit of the holidays began to settle over Charlotte's home. Twinkling lights adorned the windows, evergreen wreaths hung on doors, and the smell of cinnamon and pine wafted through the air. For the first time in years, Charlotte felt a true sense of anticipation for the holiday season. Not for the lavish parties or business dinners, but for the chance to celebrate with her newfound family. Claire had decided to stay through Christmas, embracing the opportunity to rebuild her bond with Liam. Their days were filled with laughter and small, meaningful moments. Claire teaching Liam how to bake her favorite gingerbread cookies, Charlotte joining them to decorate the Christmas tree with ornaments collected from her many travels. Each ornament held a memory, and Charlotte delighted in sharing these stories with Liam, who listened wide-eyed, adding a few decorations of his own. One snowy evening, as they sat by the fireplace drinking hot chocolate, Liam looked up, his voice breaking the cozy silence. "Mom, Grandma," he said, hesitating as if gathering courage. "Do you think Dad is watching us? Does he know we're all together now?" Charlotte and Claire exchanged a glance, each of them feeling the gravity of his question. Claire reached over, resting a hand on Liam's shoulder. "I believe he is, sweetheart. I believe he can see how much we love each other, and that we're finally together." "That's what he would have wanted." Charlotte nodded, a soft smile touching her lips. "Your dad had a big heart, Liam. I think he's with us in everything we do, in every story we share. He'd be so proud of you." Liam seemed content with their answers, and he leaned back into Charlotte's embrace, his face glowing with the warmth of the moment. They watched as snow began to fall outside, blanketing the world in a gentle hush. As the days drew closer to Christmas, Charlotte felt an itch to do something special for Liam and Claire, something that would cement their bond as a family. She found herself thinking back to her own childhood memories, of the one year her family had taken a trip to a cabin nestled in the mountains, a place untouched by the hustle of everyday life. She recalled the magic of that winter holiday, the sense of wonder and joy that had filled her heart, and decided to recreate that experience for them. The morning before Christmas Eve, she announced her plan to take them on a surprise trip. Liam's face lit up with excitement as he peppered her with questions, while Claire smiled, intrigued but hesitant. "I just want us to spend this holiday somewhere magical, where we can leave behind all the pain of the past," Charlotte explained. "I found a beautiful cabin in the mountains. It's simple and cozy, a place where we can just be together and make new memories." With their bags packed, they set off for the cabin, the car filled with laughter and carols playing softly on the radio. The winding road took them higher into the mountains, where the landscape was dusted with fresh snow, and the air held a crisp, quiet beauty. By the time they arrived, the cabin looked like something out of a storybook, with icicles hanging from the eaves and a chimney releasing thin plumes of smoke. Inside, the cabin was warm and welcoming, with a crackling fire and large, cozy blankets draped over every surface. Charlotte and Claire set to work preparing a simple dinner while Liam, brimming with energy, explored every corner, exclaiming over the rustic charm and the stacks of firewood neatly piled by the door. After dinner, they gathered around the fire, sharing memories and stories as the flames cast a golden glow over the room. Charlotte noticed how much Liam had grown over the past months, not just physically but emotionally. His laughter was more frequent, his eyes brighter, and the sadness that once clouded his spirit seemed to have lifted. As they sat together, Charlotte produced a small box wrapped in gold paper and handed it to Liam. "This is for you," she said, her voice soft. "It's something I've been saving for a long time." Liam's eyes sparkled with curiosity as he carefully unwrapped the box. Inside was a pocket watch, simple, silver, and worn, with an engraving on the back, "To my son, with all my love." "This belonged to your father," Charlotte said, her voice catching. "It was given to him by your grandmother Dolores. I saved it, hoping that one day I might have the chance to pass it on to you." Liam ran his fingers over the cool metal, his face a mixture of awe and emotion. "Thank you, Grandma," he whispered, clutching the watch to his chest. "This means so much to me." Charlotte felt a tear slip down her cheek, and she reached out to pull him close. "You're part of a long line of people who love you, Liam, and this family will always be here for you." Claire wrapped her arms around them both, The three of them huddled together, bound by memories, love, and a future that held the promise of hope. Later that night, after Liam had fallen asleep by the fire, Charlotte and Claire sat together, sharing a quiet moment as snow began to fall outside once more. "I have to thank you, Charlotte," Claire said, her voice thick with emotion. "You didn't just help Liam. You helped me find a piece of myself that I thought I'd lost forever." Charlotte placed a gentle hand over Claire's. "You're part of this family now, Claire. We all needed each other to heal. And whatever happened in the past, we have each other now." They sat in silence, watching the snow drift gently to the ground, their hearts full of gratitude and peace. As Christmas morning dawned, the cabin filled with the smell of fresh pine and laughter. They exchanged gifts, small, thoughtful tokens that spoke of their shared journey and the love that had blossomed from it. It was a simple Christmas, with no grand decorations or elaborate feasts, but it was one of pure, unfiltered joy. They spent the day playing in the snow, building a snowman and making angels in the untouched drifts, their laughter echoing through the quiet mountain air. That night, as they sat by the fire, Liam curled up between his mother and grandmother, his eyes heavy with sleep but his heart light with happiness. And as the firelight flickered, casting a warm glow over their faces, Charlotte knew they had finally found their way home, to each other. The new year arrived with a fresh blanket of snow covering the mountains and an air of peace settling over the cabin. Charlotte, Claire, and Liam spent their final morning at the cabin preparing to head back to the city. The last few days had been filled with quiet reflection, shared stories, and the simple joys of being together, a stark contrast to the hustle and solitude Charlotte had once embraced in her life. She felt a profound sense of gratitude for this second chance at family. As they packed, Liam grew quiet, his gaze lingering on the snowy landscape outside. Charlotte noticed his thoughtful expression and knelt beside him. "Everything all right, sweetheart?" she asked, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. Liam nodded, but his voice was pensive. "I just don't want it to end. Being here. It feels like it's just us, like nothing else matters." Charlotte's heart swelled, and she drew him into a gentle hug. "I know, but you know, Liam, this feeling doesn't have to end. Family isn't just a place. It's something we carry with us. No matter where we go, we have each other now." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with understanding. "Promise." "Promise," she said, planting a gentle kiss on his forehead. Claire joined them, smiling as she watched the bond between her mother-in-law and her son. She knew how much Charlotte had given up, and she sensed that she, too, had found a sense of peace she hadn't known before. Back in the city, the rhythm of daily life returned, but with a new warmth and purpose. Charlotte continued to make time for Liam and Claire, balancing her professional commitments with her renewed dedication to her family. Her house, once quiet and immaculately maintained, now echoed with laughter and the occasional clutter of art supplies, books, and the joyful chaos that Liam brought into their lives. In early spring, Liam's school held a family day event, inviting students to bring their family members for a day of activities. Claire and Charlotte both eagerly agreed to attend, though they felt a certain trepidation. For Charlotte, this would be the first time she'd be surrounded by families in a way that made her feel like she belonged, after so many years of standing apart. And for Claire, it was a chance to reconnect with the simple joys of being a mother. The school gymnasium was buzzing with activity as families gathered, chatting and laughing. Liam clung to both of their hands, introducing his two moms to teachers and friends. Though a few eyebrows raised in curiosity, Charlotte and Claire met each introduction with warmth and pride. They were his family, bound not just by blood, but by choice and love. In the middle of the event, Liam's teacher invited him to the front of the room. Liam shifted nervously, clutching his sketchbook close to his chest. "Today," his teacher announced, "Liam has chosen to share something very special with us. A story he wrote about his family." Liam's face flushed with excitement, and he opened his sketchbook, reading in a clear, steady voice. "This is the story of my family," he began, glancing shyly at Charlotte and Claire. "Once upon a time, there was a boy who thought he was alone, but then he found out he wasn't. He had a mom who loved him and a grandma who gave him a new home. Together, they made him feel like he was part of something bigger, something that would last forever. Claire and Charlotte exchanged a glance, their eyes misting with tears. Liam's words, simple as they were, carried a depth of understanding and love that warmed their hearts. He continued, showing sketches he'd drawn of their days together. His mom baking cookies, his grandma reading to him by the fire, and the three of them decorating the Christmas tree. Each picture was imbued with the love he felt, and with each page, he looked up, smiling a little wider, as if realizing just how much he belonged. As he finished, the room broke into applause, and Liam returned to them, beaming. Charlotte pulled him into her arms, holding him close as Claire wrapped her arms around them both. They stood there, a family woven together by life's unexpected twists, basking in the love they had found against all odds. In the following weeks, Charlotte found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. The once steady ache of regret and loss had softened, replaced by a deep satisfaction and gratitude. She had learned that family was not defined solely by biology or upbringing, but by the people who stayed, the ones who loved each other through hardship and forgiveness. On a quiet afternoon, Charlotte received a letter from the orphanage where she had first met Liam. It was a simple thank you note for her continued donations, but at the bottom, written in Sister Margaret's careful handwriting, was a reminder that stuck with her. Family is a gift, Miss Sinclair, one that sometimes comes to us when we least expect it. Cherish it, for it is life's greatest treasure. Charlotte smiled, folding the letter and tucking it into a drawer. She would cherish it, she knew, and she would work every day to nurture the family she had rediscovered. That evening, as they sat together for dinner, she looked around the table, her heart full. Liam was telling a story, his hands animated, his face lit with joy, while Claire listened, laughter sparkling in her eyes. Charlotte felt a wave of contentment unlike anything she had known before. After dinner, they walked through the garden together, the sky tinged with the soft colors of sunset. Liam tugged at Charlotte's hand, pointing out the first stars that began to dot the sky. "Grandma, do you think Dad's up there?" he asked, looking up with wonder. Charlotte smiled, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "I think he's watching over us, Liam, and I think he's very happy to see us all together." Liam's face softened with a smile, and he leaned his head against her arm. "I'm happy too." They stood there, basking in the quiet beauty of the evening, their hearts bound by the love they had found in each other. Charlotte realized that the ache of her past had finally transformed into a joy she hadn't believed possible. As the stars filled the sky, Charlotte whispered a silent thank you to Dolores, to Thomas, and to the universe for giving her this second chance. And, hand in hand, their family walked forward into the night, knowing that they would face whatever the future held together. Spring had arrived, bringing with it new life and color to Charlotte's home. The garden, once so meticulously maintained yet empty, was now filled with the sounds of laughter and the sight of fresh blooms. Charlotte was kneeling among the budding flowers, a quiet smile on her face as she worked, feeling the warmth of the sun on her shoulders and the peace that had settled over her life. Inside the house, Liam and Claire were preparing for their latest tradition, Sunday family dinners. It was a simple ritual, but one that had become sacred, a way to celebrate the family they had become. Liam had taken a particular interest in cooking, and with Claire's guidance, he was learning to make dishes his father had loved as a child, recipes passed down from Dolores. The kitchen was filled with the rich scent of homemade pasta and fresh bread, their laughter echoing as flour dusted the countertops. As she finished in the garden, Charlotte stepped inside, welcomed by the warmth and liveliness of her home. She paused in the doorway, watching Liam as he carefully stirred a pot, his brow furrowed in concentration while Claire looked on proudly. The sight made her heart swell with gratitude. Later that evening, as they gathered around the dinner table, Liam raised his glass of sparkling apple cider, his young face alight with joy. "I want to make a toast," he announced, his voice earnest, "to my mom and my grandma, who found me and made me feel like I belong. And to all the adventures we'll have together." Charlotte and Claire exchanged a glance, each of them blinking back tears as they raised their glasses in response. "To family," Charlotte added, her voice thick with emotion. "And to the love that brought us together." They clinked their glasses, the sound filling the room with a gentle ring, a symbol of all they had overcome and the future they were embracing. They ate, laughed, and shared stories late into the night, the warmth of their bond filling the house with a quiet magic. After dinner, as Liam drifted off to sleep, Claire and Charlotte sat together on the porch, watching the stars blink into view in the night sky. The silence between them was comfortable, a reflection of their shared journey and the peace they had found. "You know," Claire began softly, her gaze fixed on the stars, "I never imagined I'd find this kind of happiness again." Charlotte reached over, taking her hand with a gentle squeeze. "Neither did I. But sometimes life has a way of giving us what we need, even if it takes time." They sat in companionable silence, the cool night air wrapping around them. In that moment, Charlotte felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a deep, abiding sense of contentment. She had found her way home, not in the grand estate she had built or the accomplishments that lined her walls, but in the simple joy of family, laughter, and love. As the stars continued to shine above, Charlotte knew that this was only the beginning of their story, a story bound not by past regrets, but by the promise of new memories and a shared future together.